Here we are on the Grind Life. Today we have my wonderful co-host Andrew, who will introduce himself in a second, and then we have JP here, who his topic is around co-parenting, which definitely aligns with the Grind Life and trying to fit everything in when you're being a busy professional and parent. So, Andrew, I might just go to you quickly so you introduce yourself before we jump in with JP.
Hey, thanks, Briley. Andrew, let's call me Brooksy. That's the way we're going to roll because it just sounds less formal and not getting told off. Hey, I'm based in Auckland, New Zealand. I had the privilege of actually being interviewed by Briley, which was a fantastic experience. So it's great to be on this side working with her today. And this topic that JP is going to be sharing with us is close to home for me. I've got 4 kids. In fact, got 3 grandkids and separated. So mine are older, but there are some really interesting nuggets that I think we're going to learn. I'm looking forward to hear from JP.
Thanks, Brooksy. Over to you, JP.
Hi, thanks for having me. I am JP. I talk and do a lot with co-parenting, and it is one of those things that is like it's a you know going through the conflict to being more collaborative and stuff like that. The more that people would ask how we did it or how you get to that kind of place, and these tools and those tools, and how did you get past this kind of stuff, became snowballed into to doing it more and speaking and advocating more about it because, if you're not trying to raise your kids to be better than you are, then you're not really succeeding as a parent. And it is a grind, with the day job I have and then doing this stuff on the side and then being a single dad that does it alone, and I'm not in a relationship. I don't have it, family members in the area to help and do all that kind of stuff. So it's a busy life for sure.
Sounds like it. And then, so what does an average week, if you could call an average week, look like for you?
I mean, there's a split. It's kind of a split year for me, because we have the extremes of weather, sunlight. So wintertime, it's probably average of 40 hours in my day job, 20 something hours on average in the side stuff. Obviously the weekends that I have my daughter and stuff like that, it's less side stuff. And then the weekends that I don't, and I'm totally alone, then it's more side stuff. And so it kind of averages out to, it's 60, 70 hours a week, of work. And then you got the single dad kind of stuff. Winter times are easier because it gets dark early, so I'm home earlier in the day and it's a little bit easier. Summertime is when you kind of ramp up the work hours because you can get more work done. You have more daylight, it's warmer temperatures, so then it gets closer to 60 hours a week in the day job, and then the same kind of 20, 30 on the afternoons and weekends. But then you get the traveling and you got the summer holidays and the summer break, and so it gets a little more chaotic. But it having a routine and setting a routine and sticking to a routine helps a lot. It's not kind of floundering, everything I'm doing at this point in the day, this point in the day, this point in the day, and all my actions are intentional to get here, get there, get this done, get that done. Not that I'm naturally a super scheduled or routine. I like the routines, but being on schedule is not necessarily second nature to me. But knowing that I have this block of time to do this, and it's easier to focus because I know I'm limiting myself, So
Not good at being on time myself.
Hey,
yeah.
hey JP, I just picked up on that word routine. So
Mhm.
is that important for your daughter as well? The routine that you have or her mum has in terms of the parenting piece?
It is. I think routine's good for everybody in many ways. I mean, obviously you can overdo it like anything else. If you get too structured or too dependent on routines and stuff like that, where you get frazzled if it, when life happens, obviously, you might need to kind of dig into how extremes you're getting. But, my morning routine is set. I wake up about the same time. I have a couple hour block before she gets up. I can do my meditation, all the normal stuff, my everyday routine. Cause it doesn't matter if it's weekend or weekday. I wake up at the same time naturally. It's not like I set an alarm or anything. It's just, but, it is important, I think, for her to see a routine and structure and have that normalcy, especially going back and forth between two houses. She's got the same sort of routines at her mom's that she has at my house. And it seems to keep the chaos down a lot, especially when you're kind of going back and forth between two houses. And then I try to not be working all the time when I have her and be doing the side hustle stuff. I mean, obviously she knows that I go to work at this time in the morning and I usually get home, this time in the afternoon, but I do think it's important for her to see not just the benefits of all the stuff that I do, but also the time that it takes and the stuff that I'm doing. You know what I mean? And so
Yep.
It's not that I'm constantly working when I have her around and this and that, but I do want her to see that you do have to put in the work to get the benefit, for the end results.
Yep. Yeah, and I applaud that. And I know that from experience. My kids are range, 4 of them, 26 to 19, and a constant that they have said as they got older in life is they do watch, right? And they do learn and they do admire or they do question, from that work perspective that dad does.
Right.
And what impact that has on the family, and then ultimately what has on their relationship with me. So yeah, absolutely. That's amazing if you're doing that.
And the other thing that in rural areas, it's more prevalent, and you guys may have something like that, down there, but up here we have a deal called 4-H, and so so you join like a 4-H club and they do sewing or animals or, steers, cattle, horse shows, dog training, all the way through, rabbits, birds, and then quilting and they do all kinds of different exhibits. And you join the club and you do this for months and months and months and months leading up to the fair. And then you show your animal or quilt or, gun cabinet that you built or whatever your project is. And then they auction off the animals and you get just like any other livestock auction kind of a deal, it's a tradition, it's something that happens in the rural areas when you go to state fairs and county fairs and stuff. And so getting her in that, and the structure of it and your reward at the end is what you put into it. So if you don't want to train your animal and make it the best shape and make it to get the ribbons and win the showmanship and have the best animal for auction, then you're not going to make as much. But if you do put in the work and you put in the effort and you're feeding them and you're doing all these different things, and so it's her deal, and I'm not one of the parents that are just going to do her stuff for her and project for her. So it's, did you feed your animals? Did you clean up the pen? Did you, and even at 10 years old, it's teaching, life lessons and it's structure and it's routine and it's, wake up in the morning, are you going to eat your breakfast before your animals do? No, well, you better go feed your animals, and stuff like that. So
do you think that in co-parenting, do you think that potentially kids mature faster because of that and they become a bit more self-sufficient?
I think they can. I think it's going to depend on if it's a super in situations where it's civil to collaborative, I think it does help. But obviously, being an only child, I have to be more intentional of responsibility in some of these things because she doesn't have a younger sibling to sort of get some of that some of that lessons of taking care of a younger sibling to kind of, figure out your age group and stuff, or maturity level to bounce off of. But um, in a lot of super chaotic, high conflict situations, it's almost I don't know if they mature much faster, but I think they get kind of stunted and jaded because of, like, any, even if you're raised in a two-parent household that's super chaotic, it's hard to develop because you're not being guided. I mean, it's going to depend on the parents having the time to to talk to you like you're a person and not, either a nuisance or, I mean, it's, but you get in the co-parenting situation, I think that one of the biggest problems that people can't, it's something you don't think about or comprehend or acknowledge, is you go through the process, and then you're in this high conflict situation, and it's really easy to get in the habit of bad mouthing the other parent, but doing it around the children. And, even me now at 40 something years old, like, I'm 50% mom, 50% dad. And so your kids are taking the beatings of all of this negative, all these things you're saying about the other parent, because they're, 50% the other parent. So then you start getting into this disconnect. And when they get a little bit older and they've taken years of this just hammering on, not directly, but they're taking all the punches that the parent's throwing, and then they want to disconnect from that parent. And you run into these kids that want to be 25 when they're 11 years old, and they think they're an adult, and they're kind of start pulling away from the guidance of their parents because their parents have basically told them, the last 5 or 10 years that they're not worth anything. And because they think they're talking about the other parent, but the children are taking all the punishment for it.
Mm. I heard you on a podcast, JP, and it was really interesting, the comment you made about referring to your child's other parent. So let's say your daughter, her mum, as your daughter's mum, and not your ex. I thought that was a really interesting phrase to use, and I get what you're meaning by that. That was really interesting. I think more people could actually take that on board. I think maybe people that are in a conflicted relationship that appears to be conflicted for the lifestyle, for the lifeline of the relationship. But I thought that was really powerful.
Well, it's well known that words are powerful, and the phrases that you use and the labels that you use and the defining characteristics, regardless of what you're talking about, and in this instance, like, yes, I either call my daughter's mother, or I call, or by name, you know what I mean? Like, I don't usually say her name on podcasts and stuff. So I say my daughter's mother, but to people that we know and people that are around, then I just say her name. But if you call, if you've been divorced for 5 years and you're still saying my ex, how are you moving forward if your mentality and thought process is still stuck in this failed relationship? Because it's not who they really are in your reality anymore. They're the other parent. You know what I mean? Are you moving forward in life and they're the other parent and you're doing the best you can for your kids? Or are you stuck in this pity party, selfish sort of emotional state where you're still holding this grudge against your ex, not the other parent or your child's other, the other? And it seems like a weird thing, but it will change. I mean, it changes the way that your nervous system flares up when you just think about the other person and you talk about the other person. I mean, even you can even, if somebody isn't sure what I mean, go into a social situation or a group and tell one story and label them your ex and look at everybody's facial expressions, and then tell the exact same story, but say the other parent or my son's father, my son's mother, my daughter's mother, whatever, and then look at their facial expressions. And you're going to get two different reactions, because when you say my ex, it just instantly generates negativity from everybody, including yourself. But it's going to constantly drag, tether you back to those feelings of, maybe you're resentful because of the divorce, or maybe your feelings are still hurt, or you're sad, or you're, whatever the case may be, it's just going to restart that emotional state every time.
Yeah. Thank you. That's the first takeaway I'm going to take away from this. Get that out of my vocabulary. Thank you very much. And sorry, just to follow, when we're talking about as children can grow up quicker,
Mm-hmm.
just maybe think about, and maybe it's particularly where there's one child, where can you fall in as a co-parent into a situation where that child becomes your counselor? Like, because you're at home with them, like that's a wrong thing, I would think. But
Right.
that must be something that people can default into.
Mm-hmm. And you see it a lot. You see it quite a bit in the US, probably Canada too, probably most first world countries or Western, sort of mentality countries that are less traditional than some of the other families or family structures. But we have a deal here where it's getting pretty bad, and they call it the daughter bestie or the son husband. And I don't want to say, I can't guarantee that it's mostly women, but it's usually mothers who are, they get these son husbands who are filling that hole of the man of the house and this and that. And then the sons are still there at 28, 29, 30 years old, because if I leave, mom's going to be completely alone, and they're kind of dependent on mom's dependent on them. And they're using sort of this non-sexual husband wife sort of dynamic, because one's guilty because mom will be alone if I leave the other situation, or the daughter turns into this therapist, venting partner, confidant, you know what I mean, like the emotional toxic waste dump of everything that's wrong, and all of these, you know what I mean. They start sort of, because they don't really, the daughters get a little bit, adolescent, teenage years, that kind of stuff, and they become the bestie, what they should be telling their adult friends or discussing with a therapist. They're dumping all of this on their daughters, and it is a deal where it's the same kind of deal, and I when I hear the term mini me, when people say, me and my mini me, I get the same sort of idea. You're stripping any individuality away from your kids, because now you're imprinting that they need to be exactly like you, because that's what you're calling them. You know what I mean? You're conditioning them that they need to be your identical twin, or something like that. But and I'm not saying that dads don't do it, but I feel like, from talking to a lot of people and being around and seeing all of these different things and contents and reading these books and stuff, one of the biggest things that sort of gets in the way, I don't want to put blame on kids for marriages, but usually when you start having kids, the females will typically engulf themselves into motherhood, and that's their entire identity, and they can't differentiate mom, and then wife goes out the window little by little, partner goes out the window little by little, and it's just all consuming mother. That's my whole identity. And dads tend to be a little more able to disconnect. I'm a businessman here, and now I'm a dad, and I'm a, rodeo guy now, and now I'm a dad. You know what I mean? They can separate, go do these other identities, and then snap back to being a dad when it's dad time. And so when you get it, it seems to be that it's more common with the moms kind of using kids for emotional sort of support, but also, men are told to not open up, not be vulnerable. It's so most of the time men aren't going to be that kind of emotional crutch, needing their kids for their emotional crutch, because, they're not going to tell anybody typically.
No.
But with the divorce rates over the last, each generation getting higher and higher and higher, and the more men who were raised without their fathers tend to have more of these emotional instability and erratic, because they didn't have the stoic father figures and the structured sort of mentality growing up, that it's getting to where it's kind of evening out, because a lot of the younger dads were raised by single mothers. And so they're a little more emotionally erratic and, living off emotions because that's how they've been raised.
Yes, exactly. Because I was thinking about the impact of the childhood of the parents
Mm-hmm.
to how they deal and cope and have any tools,
Right.
co-parenting themselves, and maybe it's some of that childhood trauma and how
Right.
that genuinely can affect. I assume that is a thing. Yeah.
And it's generational curses. If you're not aware or even willing to acknowledge that you need to be different than maybe your parents were. And I mean, there's a lot of forgiveness with your parents. It was one of the things I struggled with until I was 35 years old, was coming to terms with the fact that my parents did the best they could with the tools that they had. But there was a lot of things in my childhood that I didn't want to pass down to my daughter, because I wanted her to not have to live a bunch of her teenage and 20s numbing herself or hiding or self-sabotaging and having these, self-worth issues and all of these things.
Mm.
And so acknowledging that these things were where my parents were lacking, and these are tools that I needed to add to my toolbox so that my daughter could be a more well-rounded, confident, young person and going into adulthood. And I mean, spoiler alert, everybody screws their kids up. I mean, it's just the way it is. If you think you're the perfect parent, at some point your kids will have something, but
Yeah.
limiting that and helping them with the tools that they can work through those things in a healthy way without needing to go through drugs and alcohol and, addictions or numbing, any of these outside things to try to hide from the pain or do these things, is the way to go for sure.
Something really well, you can articulate really well a lot of these concepts and about how the impact of your parents, and you're making that effort to ensure that you said, spoiler alert, everyone's going to screw up their kids, but it sounds like you're doing a really great job.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess part of it is like, how did you get to this point for you? So what spurred you on?
Mine was, so I had a lot of self-worth baggage, types of trauma. I mean, it wasn't a deal where it was, I still do the justification, even knowing that your body and your subconscious doesn't differentiate this trauma to that trauma. Trauma's trauma to your body and everything else. But I mean, consciously, it wasn't like it was a violent household, or it was just a chaotic household. My parents worked a lot. We kind of fended for ourselves. Emotionally, it was disconnected. Communication wasn't a big thing. It was, that was just the environment. And so you got attention when you did something wrong, not necessarily when you were doing something well. I wasn't necessarily demanding kid, so I kind of grew up with the forgotten child syndrome. You're not wanted, these things. Get into a couple failed relationships, spiral. And then when I was 34, my daughter was 2, her mother and I had split up. And it was, move out of the house, you do what when you're starting over, you move out, you move in with your parents because you're starting your life completely over. And I got a 2-year-old, just turned 2. I'm a single dad, never been a single dad. This whole new reality, all this stuff is it's a lot,
Yeah.
3 weeks later, my dad dies unexpectedly. So I'm at their house.
Oh.
He was doing his Sunday morning run to get in shape because he was going to try to qualify for the Boston Marathon. Like he was, and he didn't make it home. And so I had that plus the grief, and then I'm, at my parents' house, but I'm stuck with my mom's grief. And then even that sort of, not that it was pushed on me, but I thought, I was like, well, now I'm stuck here because if I leave mom's alone, she's never been alone her entire adult life. They've been married the entire time I've been alive. So now, like, what do? I can't go start my own life because then I leave mom kicking around this 4-bedroom house like a ghost. You know what I mean? Because they owned a small restaurant together. So when he died, she didn't have a job to go to anymore to distract. I mean, she was wide open all day because the restaurant closed because he was the cook, she was the waitress. And so that sent me into this zombie-like depression. I just went to work, and when if I had my daughter, I wasn't working. If I didn't have my daughter, I was at work, and that was all I did. Quit socializing, didn't go out, didn't do anything other than those two things. Like, didn't want to be around people. And then we were still in a conflict. I was really, really stuck in my own pity party. The poor me and everything sucks in life and da 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 da. And feel bad for me. And then I would get instantly defensive with my daughter's mother. And then we would poke back and forth for a few days. And then we'd have a big argument or blow up, a few days, week later. And that went on for probably a year. And I think we were having one of those blow ups, and I was outside out back in my parents' house, and my daughter was inside, I thought. And so we were out yelling on the phone, doing something, and I turn around and my daughter's standing there just bawling her eyes out because she'd seen us do it, enough, and knew who I was talking to and knew what was going on. So then I look at my mom. My mom's looking at me like I'm a low life kind of, and I'm just like, this isn't the life I want. This isn't how I want to live my life. And so then it became figuring out how to, what trauma was and how to process baggage. And then the more that I learned, the farther I went back, and the farther I went back, then the more I had to heal from this and forgive people for that. And then it just, as I got better, the entire situation and everything in my life got better. And then it just kept, bouncing back and forth. The better my life got, the better I got. And then the better I felt about myself, the less I was prone to self-sabotage or try to, hide from who I was. And the more that I could look in the mirror, the less I needed to numb myself. And then everything just kept reciprocating and building off each other.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that, because that's an incredible experience that you've gone through. And the word mindset comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
You reach that point, and so as parents, the I don't know, willingness to change or to get better or work on that resilience must be such a powerful thing in that co-parenting relationship.
Yeah, and I mean, when you can start getting out of your own way, especially in the co-parenting kind of thought process mentality, it's and some of it's the divorce process and the way that it's designed to make you point fingers at the other person because to get the better results, or you have these lawyers and you're pitted against each other, and then it becomes a habit. Because a lot of times when people are separated, they're almost in a better civil sort of understanding, and then you get into the lawyer part of it and the custody battle part of it, and then the finger pointing, and then I got screwed, or you took something that wasn't yours, or I feel like I took the raw end, or I don't get as much time, and this and that. And it's easy to get so into that pity party and that sort of stuff, and you're just being defensive all the time. Like I was being defensive all the time. And when I started getting better at communicating, then our communication got better. And then the better our communication got, the better I got, and it just kept stacking on top of itself. But it got, and it takes time. I mean, this is over like 3 or 4 year process to get from one A to B. Cause like any divorce, I'm sure that everybody said that they changed, I'll change. I won't be like that. And then you always end up back that way. So you actually have to change this time. But once you can get out of your own way and see things for what they are and start communicating effectively, it becomes easier because you'll stop making everything about you, and then it really becomes about the kids, and I did a lot of mindfulness training, and being able to let thoughts and emotions just kind of come and go, and not getting amped up in them. But I think it took me about a little over a year. I had one of those small memo notebooks in my pocket all the time. And because I would get a text from my daughter's mother and it would send my nervous system into fight or flight, and I would get instant, and I would react. I wouldn't respond to what she was asking me or trying to talk to me about. I would react. And that would be where I would send whatever came to my mind, because my heart rate goes up, my nervous system goes into flare and fight or flight, and I would just send a reaction response. And so little by little, I had to train myself by writing in that deal what I initially would want to send back, unless it absolutely which is very rare, that it needs a response in that exact moment. I would write it down in that little book, put it in my pocket, wait till I knew that my body was calmed down, my body temperature was down, my nervous system calmed down, and then I would read what I wrote down. And 99% of the time, I'm like, I'm not sending that to her. It's just going to start a fight. And then and then it was easier to respond because I was responding instead of reacting. And the more that I did that, then the less that, I sort of trained my brain to get out of this, instant defensiveness, because even, 6 months, a year later, it didn't seem like all of her texts were attacking. They didn't see, like, I was reading them different because I was mentally changing to see them for what they were, as opposed to just instantly having my feelings hurt, like she's trying to pick at me or poke me, And so it's little things like that. But once you can communicate, that's where it's going to start.
Yeah.
But you got to be honest with yourself.
Yeah. I've done that at work, actually. I've done that a few times. Type out an email, leave it overnight in draft, come back the next morning, read it. Oh boy, delete.
Yeah.
And do another one. Yeah. No, that's
this is just going to start a bunch of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. And I was doing it all the time. And I mean, it was over stupid things. Like, we had a deal early on where I had her, it's like on Wednesdays or something like that. And so I'd get a text, midday. Hey, what time do you think you're going to pick her up tonight? What time do you think you're going to be back in town, or this or that? And my instant defensiveness would be like, well, I'll let you know when I'm leaving, on my way. Or I'd send something snotty like that. And then, after I'd got a lot of separation, a year later, after a bunch of this, it was like, I would get snotty, but it had nothing to even do with me, because once I started saying like, oh, it's going to be like 6, 7, 5, I just send her what time I figured I'd be into town. I would just get an okay back, but it had nothing to do with me, because all she wanted to know is if I got there early enough, I would take my daughter and feed her. And if it was going to be after dinner time, then she needed to feed her. So she was just trying to figure out if she had to make plans to cook something that my daughter would eat or not. And I mean, really, that was probably all the information that she needed to know. I would get defensive, and it was just bad communication, but it was mostly on my side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think, just stepping back to the conflict part, do you think that your approach has changed as well? It certainly sounds like you've got some good tools and tricks there, but do you think, for like, if you were to give advice to other parents around how they could shift their approach to conflict?
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea that you're still going to be able to change or force somebody to change into what you want them to be, instead of changing yourself into the co-parent that you want to deal with, is one of the bigger issues. It's sort of like, day-to-day adulting is not my strongest suit, right? It's not. If I don't put it in the schedule, I'll probably lose track, and it needs to be, I have to force myself to. And So, and I'm more go with the flow personality and this and that. And so but my daughter's mother's personality needs to know, wants to know, so when I travel with my daughter, her mom likes to know when we're getting off this plane, on the next plane, how long's the layover, when we get to where we're going, call me a few times, this and that. And she likes to know, and she likes to have everything figured out, and she likes to know, and this and that's her personality. And I'm not going to be able to change the more controlling aspect of her personality, and the more scheduling, and the more adult, and the day-to-day sort of stuff. And when I started accepting her for who she is, instead of wanting to beat my head off a brick wall trying to change her, then everything started running smoother. But I'm on the other end, and so it's I don't, when they go on trips or they're flying and stuff like that, it's like, yeah, if you get time, when you get there, call me, let me know you landed, and maybe if you guys aren't busy, video call me a couple times, depending how long you're gone, this and that. And that approach of allowing the other person to be who they are, and it's got, once again, it's got nothing to do with me. She's not coming at me like I'm a horrible dad that's going to lose my daughter at the airport layover in Denver or something like that. She's worries, and that is completely fine. I can either fight her about it and make things worse. And I mean, you're talking about 5 seconds out of my trip to send her a text saying that we're getting on the plane. You know what I mean? Like, you can make these conflict situations worse if you want to. And which is typically what is happening, but if you approach it like they're this person, this is who they are. You obviously know them. You have a child together. You're not going to change. You couldn't change them when you were married. You're probably not going to be able to change them being divorced. And so you can either accept them and let them be their, the way that they are in their personality. Now, when you get into overstepping and boundaries and that kind of stuff, that's a whole nother story. But, on a general approach, let them be who they are. And odds are, the more that you just allow them to be, they'll let you be who you are. Because it's a give and take. But it's, if you give them a lot of respect, odds are that you're going to get it reciprocated, like any other sort of relationship, whether it's business, personal, professional, that kind of stuff. I mean, you're going to get a lot of what you give. And so if you're being secretive, then don't get mad that they're being secretive, because they're going to approach you the same way you're approaching them.
Yeah. Yeah. That definite move from conflict to collaboration. No, I can definitely see it. JP, I just wanted to bring us back for a sec as well, back to blended families, which doesn't always happen in all situations, but it happens in a number. Is there a way to prepare your child or your children for the fact they're going to go into this new universe that's this family they've never met? Is there any tools that parents can hook into on that?
I mean, the dating, the new partnerships, the getting into the dating is typically a big hot button that either accelerates, a lot of the conflict, because then now you got 3 personalities, whether the bonus parent wants to be involved in a lot of this stuff. I mean, it kind of depends on the personalities of everybody. But early on, we had set a deal with each other, and it worked. And I didn't think about it at the time, but looking back, because it was her mother that had brought it up, and it worked out really well. And it was we made a deal that if I started dating somebody, or if she started dating somebody, and it got serious enough to where they were going to be around our daughter, we got to meet them first before they were ever around our daughter, so we could get a feel for the other person. Because obviously it's going to take a lot of trust, respect. I mean, if you're not in a good place, it's hard to sort of make some of these, arrangements. But when you're in that honeymoon phase, you're not seeing the other person very clearly. But the things that maybe I'm overlooking or disregarding or not picking up on, she would, from an interaction, or, we all went out to dinner or something like that. And so that helps, my daughter never came home and said, Mom's new boyfriend moved in with us. And when I didn't even know she had a boyfriend, you know what I mean? Like, it sidestepped a lot of these these big blowups and conflicts. I think for, depending on the age of the kids and stuff like that, it's going to be different conversations, obviously. And how much time, I think it would be a harder conversation, say, if I was to start dating somebody and they had kids and we got to where we were going to move in together. I think it would be a much different conversation and a harder thing for my daughter to wrap her mind around than the other situation, that the blended family she's in now, because then you're going to have to, sit down, and I would sit down and reassure her about, yes, these other children are probably going to spend more time with me than you are, but that doesn't mean that they're going to replace you, and some of those things, because, when it's a blended family and somebody's moving into their home, but not necessarily stealing their time with their parent, and so, but honesty is going to be the best policy.
Yeah.
And, when we moved here to Montana, that's when they were getting together, moving in with each other. My daughter was going into this blended family. So she moved a third of the way across the country into a blended family all at the same time. And so preparing her for that, and then she was getting ready to go into first grade that next month and stuff like that. So she had a lot going on. So it was a lot of excitement, nervousness, but we've always been able to talk about, age appropriate, obviously, but always been open and talking. I've really worked on being able to have open communication with her and stuff like that, because that was lacking in my childhood. And I feel like that hampered me. And so, even if something's going on in her life, she comes, talks to dad, and it's, I've trained myself to stay calm and be able to be aware enough of doing my best. I just always doing my best.
Oh no, hey JP, as dads, we're always doing our best. It's just, sometimes it feels like you're climbing a mountain. But I think the use of the word mum and the use of the word dad is so special and privileged even. So I know talking to some other friends with younger kids, their kids have always said that, say that the mum's new boyfriend, it's like, oh, I'm not going to call him dad.
Right.
Like, you're my dad. Or I'm not going to call that, your new partner mum because she's my mum. And I think, yeah, I mean, that's how that makes sense. Now, when they're later in life and we're all tickety-boo and things are normal and they become, that's different. But there's something powerful in those two words, mum and dad.
Right. And I think the one thing I would say about, the bonus parents idea, the bonus moms, the bonus dads, the step parents, that kind of deal. The less that you're competing and making it a competition with, like her stepdad. I mean, they're not technically married, but we'll say her stepdad. Like, I'm not in competition with him at all.
Yeah.
And so there isn't that energy. There isn't that vibe. There's none of that terminology. There's none of this, well, you're going on vacation with him, so I got to one up him, next week, or, there's none of that. And so when you can get to a place where it's, I'm a firm believer of a village to raise a child. And I think the most well-rounded children are going to have different ideals and thought processes and viewpoints, like we did before social media, when you were at your parents', your aunts, uncles, grandparents, your friends' parents, and everybody was around and people were talking around you all the time. And so you had a barrage of different inputs and morals and values and thought processes and viewpoints, as opposed to, only dads, only moms. And so I am welcome, the extra help and the extra people, but setting boundaries and setting, wants, needs, expectations of, I'm not involved in their household decisions, and I don't need to be involved in their household decisions. but he knows that it's not going to be an issue if he disciplines my daughter, but we all have the same beliefs, values, morals, that kind of stuff, and if she does something where she's in trouble, I get a text from her mom that says, "You need to have a talk with your daughter." You know what I mean? That's when I know that she's in trouble. You need to have a talk with your daughter. And so it's, but if everybody knows their role and everybody knows their place and stuff, and if I've had some serious relationships over the years, and it's not a deal where anybody's competing to be her mom or anything like that. She has a mom, and if you want to be in my life, then you need to be a good role model, and you need to have, good values and that kind of stuff to last. But also, like, open communication is going to be a big part, because
Yeah. It's interesting
but it is.
Just
What's
sorry,
that?
that was me. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
I'll edit my over out. But I was just thinking from the surplus parent or the extra parent, which is where I kind of fit in. So before when I met my husband, I read a book about dating the divorced dad, right? And it gives you all these rules and stuff about like things to look out for and making sure there's been a period of time where they've been separated, so you're not just diving straight in. And then talking about whether you are going to be the type of influence in the kid's life that you're more of a friend, or whether you are going to kind of get elevated to more of the parent type thing. I default to the friend because I'm not a math, day-to-day adulting is not my strength either. I get through life, but it's, not my strength in terms of being scheduled and routine, whereas my husband's great like that, right? So I kind of defaulted definitely into that friendship and just wanted to be his kid's friend. And it's still very much like that now. Like, we joke around, text messages, that sort of thing as well. And they laugh at me about how terrible I am at video games and all that sort of stuff. So it's all good. But sometimes there does come a point for that like bonus parent where you're a little bit like, do I need to step in and say something? So would you have any advice for that parent on kind of how to approach the conversation of boundaries and shouldn't I? Because it does play on your mind. You're like, oh, should I be doing something here, or do I just report it to their dad and let him deal with it?
I mean, I guess for the most part, it's going to kind of, you're going to be teetering on a line of the boundaries of the situation you're in, and the relationship that you would have with the mom, or I would have with the dad, or, my partner would have with my daughter's mom, that kind of deal is going to determine, whose feelings are going to get hurt, or who's going to feel disrespected or something like that. I mean, obviously if it's, the first 6 months is completely different than after 8 years, because, the relationship that you have with the kids and how receptive they're going to be to what you say, and all of those things are going to make a little bit of a difference as well. But I would say one of the biggest, I would say one of the one big thing that seems to generate a lot of conflict is a bonus parent that sort of gets overly
tries to be the mum. I watched one of my friends do that.
Gets too involved too soon, I guess. You know what I mean? And then when the kids they don't have a relationship with the kids, or if the co-parents aren't in a good relationship, and say the mom's telling the kids, you don't have to listen to her because she's not me, da 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 da, and then so you kind of have to feel it out. But if you don't have a relationship with the kids, even if the mom's not doing that, the kids are probably not going to be very receptive. You're going to need to be more the guidance and sort of in their orbit for a long time, because they're not going to want to listen to you, because they're going to think they're betraying their mom or betraying their dad, or, and that just takes time, if it's like I said, a deal where the mom or the dad's telling the kids, you don't have to listen to that person, then then it's probably better to have a conversation with the parent that you're with to say, hey, if don't push me into this role because I'm not going to be able to do it effectively. Or if I'm getting undercut because of this, that, those, and the others, I can be here to support you, and what you say goes. And if you ground them, then I'll hold the line while you're at work or this or that. But I'm not setting the rules, and I'm not enforcing. I can help keep the rules enforced, but it's not going to be my place to discipline and not be my place to do these things, at least until you get a relationship built with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly wasn't my default style. I was a bit like, I just want them to have a good time when they're with us.
Mm-hmm.
And
but it also is going to, like, I mean, I would think that your situation was would probably be somewhat easier because you said that you didn't have children of your own.
That's right.
And so when you have two children from two sides coming together in one, and
yeah,
the bonus parent is going to try to have the other kids listen and respect and respond and act like their kids, and that's not always going to be the case. Yeah. Because if they've always been able to do something with dad, and then now all of a sudden stepmom's saying no, it ain't going to fly. The kids are going to push back because you're not my mom, you're not my dad, and so it's a hard line to navigate, especially when you get kids from both sides coming together and trying to blend, two families of kids that have been raised two conflicting styles or with two different sets of rules. And obviously you're going to get the kids, like I had said previously, I think it would be harder on my daughter if I met a woman that had kids that were going to be around me all the time, because then you're going to start getting the jealousy and the competition between the two different kids, which is going to make it harder for the bonus parents to engage with the kids, because you're taking my dad, you're stealing my time, or depending on, the communication. I mean,
yeah, just thinking, just, I guess one thing we think about that co-parenting as well, JP, and there's a lot on and there's a lot happening. And obviously, we're talking about parenting. So there's incredible focus on the children. But as a parent, somewhere in there is your own personal growth. There is a life to sort of lead, like it's not away from your child or that. But is there an element there that sometimes we just lose that because we're just so focused in that co-parenting? Or is there some techniques that the parent can think about their own personal growth and all that's going through?
It is harder for people who, for me, it's when I have my daughter, I'm super attentive, super involved, but it's easier for me, or it's been easy for me to be able to, be a construction worker, carpenter, be the coach, be the pod, do these other things and disconnect from dad mode or parent mode. But, if something's going on, and I get a text, and then, I go pick her up and that kind of stuff. It's been easy to be able to shift back and forth for me and focus on things that I need to work on, or relationships or business and work and these things. It helps living in a small rural area with my daughter. It's not a deal where she's 3 states away or 1,000 miles away, and I get her, Christmas break, spring break month in the summer, something, you know what I mean? Like we are able to be very free with her because, we live 6 blocks away from each other. So that makes it easier to, if something comes up and it's, we're working over the weekend or something like that, I can text her mom and be like, hey, we're going to work Saturday. Are you busy? And then she'll send me a text back like, no, it's no big deal. You got to work or something. It's like, yeah. And she's like, oh, yeah, it's no big deal. So I drop her off in the morning, go to work, pick her back up. And so it's easy to disconnect because I'm not, chaotic with schedule, and I'm not chaotic with babysitters, daycare, all these different things as I would be, if we weren't able to cohabitate and communicate well, or if we, lived 5 states away from each other and I had her for a whole month in the summertime, then it would be all life shuts down because I got to make up the whole year that I didn't get with my daughter in this month. But if you, I mean, you got to be able to disconnect from mom mode, dad mode, and be able to take care of yourself and still have a life, or it's going to be really hard to not have some sort of resentment or feel like you lost out on or didn't do or missed opportunities because you were totally engulfed in being a mom, being a dad. I mean, it's important to still have a life and date and do these things, I mean, and as your kids get older, they're going to want to be more independent. And so the time that I have to work on my personal stuff when my daughter's 10 years old is completely different than when she was 6 years old. That was completely different when she was 4 years old, because she has her own friends in life and wants to do sleepovers and wants to do these things. And as she gets older, it's going to be, the school dances, football games, and hanging out with friends, and, starts driving and all that stuff. And so you don't need to, sit around and wait for them to grow up to have your own life, like everybody seems to think, or, a lot of people tend to get into that routine anyway.
They really do. So on that, you mentioned meditation at the start in terms of you have your morning routine, and that's quite set for you. So do you have other tools and things that you use to set yourself up for a productive week?
I have to put everything in a calendar or know exactly, I mean, I wake up at a certain time and I have my morning, I wake up without an alarm clock about 5 a.m. I'm walking out the door about 8 a.m. And I wake up and I do the same thing as soon as I wake up, feed the dog, make sure she's got water, get my cup of coffee, meditate, some journaling, check my emails, and then get ready to get in the shower, walk out the door. And then, in the afternoons when I get home from work, same kind of deal, make sure the dog's taken care of and this and that. But I don't do the meal prep type stuff.
Hard work.
My job's, it's either me all the time by myself or me and Adeline, and it doesn't save me any money by grocery shopping and doing that kind of stuff. I mean, where I live, there's not a lot of fast food. So it's small diner restaurants, mom and pop shops, which is,
Cute.
it's $20, and I don't have dishes and this and that. So I don't spend a lot of time cooking, which saves me a lot of time because I don't have the cleanup. I don't have the grocery shopping. I don't have all that sort of stuff. Because even if I did, I'm not saving any money because I'd throw most of it away because it just wouldn't last. Nothing's made for one person.
No.
And I don't watch TV, which has made a big,
is that intentional?
a huge difference. Yeah. I mean, I started doing the mindfulness training and becoming more aware of, when you become aware, you become aware of everything. So with the meditating is part of the mindfulness and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then you start becoming aware of what's influencing you and what's influencing your thoughts and your mental health and conditioning you and brainwashing you and all these different things. And so if I watch TV for entertainment, I have a couple streaming things. And if I know I'll enjoy something for entertainment purposes, I'll watch that. But sitting there 3-4 hours a night, flipping through the channels, watching the news or something, that's intentionally not something I do. And so then I'd shifted from numbing myself and doing the TV type stuff, or getting depressed by having the news in the background sort of stuff. And then I listen to about 200 hours a month on Audible
Oh wow. What sort of
is what
books
I
are you?
average. And so like 60, 80 books a year I'm going through on Audible. And so
Awesome. Is that
I listen to it a lot, but I can do stuff while I'm listening to it. And it's stuff that, I just, I would rather learn than watch mind numbing TV or the news. So
the, the news is so depressing.
I've
Sorry,
got into
Brooksy.
really challenging myself listening to a podcast called The Grind Life. It's inspiring and inspirational. I've got to tell you.
Good plug, Brooksy.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. So, because the grind life is a lot about how you're trying to fit everything in. So, as I was saying
mhm.
earlier, the grind, I don't mean smashing it at the gym and grinding it out. I just mean sometimes when you're somewhere in your 30s, 40s, 50s, you're not close to retirement. You've been working for a long time, but you're also not close to retirement either.
Yeah.
So sometimes it can just feel like a grind. And I was chatting to someone the other day about parenting, and they don't openly share it too much, but they were sharing generously with me about how hard it is being a parent. And sometimes it is just a grind. And they
Yeah.
also run their own small business, and that's really challenging as well, because their families, financial health is dependent on him doing really, really well. So that's
Right.
kind of what I was coming at with the grind life, in terms of like, it's okay, I hope. I'm not sure if either of you agree, but I feel like sometimes it's okay for us to admit that life can be a grind. Like, you're not always on top.
Yeah. Well, and it can. I mean, you always get tested, whether it's the universe or life or, whatever the case may be. And I mean, this winter I don't, I feel like it was a bit of a test, but I also feel like it was a bit of look how far you've come kind of, like an instance, like, because I was always doing the numbing, self-sabotaging, for years and years and years. And then started working on myself. And then, you understand that it's a lifelong deal, and that you're grinding, through work, trying to survive and do all these things. And you want to raise the best children that you can. And you want to, have some sort of financial freedom, or at least security, and not have to work till you die, and all these, and, have a little bit of freedom to travel and do these things. And, the more growth you get, and the better that you think, oh, I can handle anything, and I'm, totally healed. And then the universe is going to throw something at you, and you're going to, it's going to test how far you've actually come. Because in September, the end of September, I was at work, and we were doing this roof and stuff, and we had sort of this mist come blowing through, and I lost traction, fell off the roof, and broke my foot in 6 places. Had to have surgery that with pins, and hit my head, and
Oh my
I got a
God.
Frankenstein scar across the top of my head, and so I was out for 5 months. It was surgery, and then the pins were in for a couple months, and then they pulled the pins out, and then I had to do the physical therapy, and I mean, it's still swollen up, and I just got cleared to go back to work like a month ago. And so that could have, it was a deal where the universe, accidents happen, the universe is going to test you, and this and that. How far have you come? How healed are you? How emotionally, mature have you become, and is it working, and all these different things. But I mean, I could have really felt sorry for myself, because I'm a single dad in a place where I don't have, my family's in other parts of the country. Thank God I have a good relationship with my daughter's mother, because then she really helped take off the slack, because obviously I can't drive. It's 40 below outside. I can't use crutches on the ice and this and that. So I'm homebound. And, you know, her and some of the other people that we know, did things to help. And I have some other great friends that I've connections that I've made here, and this and that. And so, like, that was nice. But it's deflating when you're a single dad who does everything. You know, I pick my daughter up, drop my daughter off, go to the school stuff, go do my own grocery shopping. Like, I work in construction. I'm a blue collar, manly man, you know, that does everything for myself. Don't need help. Won't ask for help. You know, all that typical stuff. And then now all of a sudden I can't even get from my bed to the kitchen.
Oh,
You know, I can't cook my own food because I'm on crutches and I can't put my foot on the ground. I can't do the dishes. You know, I mean, I'm kind of like really not doing anything. And, you know, my mom thankfully is retired and stuff. And so she flew up and stayed for a couple months, at least until I could drive myself to the physical therapy and that kind of stuff. But it was I mean, it was testing, and it showed how far I've come, but also, you know, it shows,
hard.
you know,
Yeah.
like it would have been easy to get into a depression and feel sorry for myself. And, you know, every time something good's going, then stuff like this, you know, I mean, you can always let the negative thoughts or that kind of stuff affect you, or you can look at the bright side of, you know, it happened and there's nothing I can do to change it. I mean, it is what it is, but not getting wrapped up in those thoughts of negativity and pity party and poor me and this and that. And, you know, a little bit of humility of, you know, forcing me to ask for help, even knowing I don't like to, and that kind of stuff. I mean, but that's part of life, and that's the grind. And I mean, it helped free up some time for the podcasting and the coaching, but, you know, other than that, that was about the only bonus part of it.
Did you want to share a bit more about your coaching and podcasting? Because we haven't covered that.
I mean, the coaching deal, it was kind of, so the better that we got at co-parenting, you know, and then we would go to places, you know, sporting events for the kids, dance recitals, school functions, you know, birthday parties and this and that. And, you know, you'd get these comments from other parents who were like, I wish me and so or my kids' other could even be civil and, you know, do these sorts of things, or, you know, be in the same room together. And then it kind of turned into, you know, some people that I knew in different times were bouncing, you know, calling and bouncing ideas off me. And I, you know, I've had mentors over the years and coaches and that kind of stuff. And then it kind of escalated into working with people in real life, and then kind of snowballed online. But when I was young, 5, 6, my dad got sober. And so we spent a lot of time, because he spent a lot of time at AA meetings. And so one of the cornerstones of AA meetings is a sponsor. You're helping somebody 3 to 5 years behind you on the same journey, you know, avoid thought patterns, booby traps, you know, things that are going to make you relapse and all these different things. And so helping people and coaching and guiding people to me seemed natural, because I grew up in that sort of a community environment sort of deal. And then it's, you know, now it's just trying to help people get out of their own way so they can, you know, raise their kids to not have to, you know, heal from a bunch of chaotic trauma throughout their whole childhood. And I mean, but that's my idea of success too. My daughter's more happy, capable, you know, well-rounded young adult human being than I am, then I succeeded in life. And that's basically all I need to be successful.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Gives you goosebumps, that, doesn't it?
Mm.
You're really, really self-aware as well, which is amazing to hear as well. Because when you were talking about the accident before, I can certainly see where the option could have been there to just sink a few beers, watch Netflix for hours on end, and just sit with that for ages. And you obviously chose not to do that, so hats off to you. You certainly sounds like you've had a chaotic upbringing, but you've turned it around into a positive, and you're certainly being the best version of you, which is amazing.
And it's yeah. And the awareness came with, you know, whether I just started listening to it or not, or acknowledging it more as I became more okay and just healed and did these things, you know, it's hard to say if it, because it came really natural either way. But as somebody who drank a lot, the better, you know, the more I did work on myself and the better I got and the better, you know, all these different things. Like I quit drinking, but I didn't mean to.
Okay.
It just became a deal that just went away.
Mm.
And even now it's a deal where it's not a thing that I have conscious. I'm not in recovery. I mean, it's no big deal to have a beer or a drink here and there sometimes, but I mean, it'll be a year and a half in between, and it's not a conscious effort where I have to limit myself or even think about it or, and so it like,
That's great because the drinking thing, right? Like I'm a kid of the 80s, 90s, early 2000s.
right,
So a lot of our socializing, like I had my first beer when I was 14, and
right,
then a lot of my socializing has been surrounded by drinking. And there's a bit of a movement in Australia at the moment, sober in the country, which is getting a lot of legs. But it's not so much about quitting drinking. It's about you don't need to drink to socialize, and you
right.
don't need to drink to relax. So
Yeah.
it's changing, but it's just really interesting because like we were those kids that you see in the memes that your parents think
Mhm.
that you're staying over at a friend's house and you're drunk on a golf course somewhere.
In a cornfield or something. Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's if I had a problem with drinking, you know, small town America is, you know, it's bars and churches, and that's the
Yeah.
majority of the stuff that's in, you know,
Mm.
rural area towns. And you know, in this area and even where we grew up and stuff, you know, it's a lot of blue collar, you know, whether it's loggers, mill guys, or oil guys, farmers, that kind of stuff. But a lot of the oil guys and a lot of the loggers, a lot of the farm, you know, the blue collar guys, they go to work all day and then they go sit at the bar all night till the bar closes and then get
Yeah.
3, 4, or 5 hours of sleep and do it all over again, you know, 5, 6 days a week, except on the weekends they close the bar down because it's open till 2 in the morning. And I mean, it's just a deal where everybody's drinking all the time. So it would be a little bit more stressful here if I had to consciously think about alcohol consumption. But
Yeah, but you don't. So
at
perfect.
this point, I don't want to be hungover is half of it.
No.
And I mean, and my daughter was a big driving factor because I didn't want to be that parent that couldn't go pick their kid up if they needed them picked up because I've been day drinking all day or was out of my mind or shouldn't be driving or anything like that. And
Yeah, there's no one else
so
to
it
come
was,
get her.
yeah.
No.
Well, I mean, even at home in Oregon, it was just I didn't want to be that parent. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like,
No. No, but I see there's a whole, you know, if we think about young people in the industry, a lot of them just don't drink
right,
now. You know, not all, but it just seems to be that sort of movement that they're just not interested because they're just trying to do stuff in life, or certainly the way they drink is different, or what they
right.
drink is different. Yeah, it's
I think
really
it's far more social now than it was, you know, 10, 15 years ago. I don't think people are over consuming as much. I think it's, you know, a couple drinks and that's it for the night, as opposed to shots and shots and shots. You know,
yeah, yeah. There's always a place for the odd shot, but
right.
just generally in terms of that in New Zealand anyway, the rise of 0% alcohol and stuff
Mhm.
like that is huge. So, which is great for society in general and
I
parents.
think I think in the States it's kind of because the majority of the U.S. now is uh, marijuana is legal, and
Oh,
so
wow.
I think the consumption of marijuana has risen. Well, I mean, obviously they know because it's legal, but I think the majority of the people that are 20 to 26 years old now are daily marijuana users as opposed to daily drinkers. They don't just they for whatever reason.
Was supposed to be, I don't know the science, but it's supposed to be far less toxic for you than what alcohol is. So you can see why they go there. So I'm conscious that we're encroaching on your evening. So before we finish up, where can
Mhm.
people find you? And is there one last message you'd like to share? So if they'd like to get coaching from you.
Instagram is where all my stuff is. Social media is not really my favorite thing on planet Earth, but it's just at JPMRSH.
I'll link that.
And then one last thing. I would say, in the co-parenting realm, one conversation that I had with my mom when we were still in somewhat a conflict, was pick your battles. The hills you want to die on, is gonna define how receptive they are. My mom had said something to me one time, and I don't remember what it was about it specifically, but she was like, well, if they're talking about you around her or her family or whatever, da da da, and I'm like, yeah, but I don't need to, because if I'm trying to pick a fight or everything's an issue, then when something is actually an issue for me, she's not going to want to listen because I'm bringing up everything all the time. And so saving those, your conflict equity, or these issues are actually important. And so, if you're okay with all these things, because don't sweat the small stuff. It's whatever, your personality is your personality. You need me to send you a text every layover and this and that. That's fine, whatever, da, 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 da. But when you actually have an issue, they're going to be far more receptive to that issue. If it's not every week, you know what I mean? If you say this is an issue for me, then they'll be a lot more receptive about it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks very much for that, Brooksy. Did you have anything to add?
No, it's just so topical, JP. What you've been sharing. We think statistics, certainly this and under here, that separations, divorces are on the rise, and that will mean there's a lot of people going into the co-parenting scenario with no experience and no tools. So what we've learned today has been fantastic, but also about that communication, and villages help raise children. And here in New Zealand, we've got a lot of hobbits, so it helps us to help raise kids as well. But we're not all alone, and there's places that we can go to get advice, and today's been awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.